Keanu Reeves was known to the world as a man of talent, kindness, and humility, but beyond the flashing cameras and red carpet events, he was someone who enjoyed walking through the city without attracting attention. On one quiet evening, when the sun had just set and the streets glowed with soft yellow lights, he decided to take a stroll. He had always found peace in such simple moments, away from the noise of fame. As he walked, he noticed a group of people sitting on the sidewalk. Some had their heads bent low, some wrapped themselves in old coats, and others just stared at the ground as if the weight of the world had taken away their voices. Keanu slowed down, his heart always soft toward those who had less. Then, among the shadows, he saw a face that stopped him in his tracks. At first, he thought his mind was playing a trick. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. The years had changed her, but deep in her eyes, there was something achingly familiar. A rush of memories flooded him: laughter under the stars, soft music playing from a cheap radio, the way they once dreamed together about a future that seemed full of light. His heart skipped a beat. Could it really be her? He stepped closer, his breath caught in his chest. The woman sitting on the cold pavement, clutching a worn blanket, was his first love. Time had left its marks on her face, her clothes were faded and torn, but her presence was unmistakable. He felt a strange mixture of joy, sorrow, and disbelief. He hadn't seen her in decades, and here she was, not in a warm home, not surrounded by family, but alone on the street. For a moment, Keanu couldn't move. The sight overwhelmed him. He remembered the first time he had met her. They were young, both filled with energy and dreams. She had been the one who made him believe in love during his teenage years, the one who inspired him to imagine a life beyond routine. They shared long conversations, whispered promises, and a bond that felt unbreakable. But life had taken them on different paths. Work, distance, and circumstances had separated them. Though time had passed, the memory of her never left his heart completely. Now, looking at her, he felt the sharp sting of reality. Life had not been kind to her. While the world praised his success, fame, and wealth, she had slipped into the shadows of society, unseen and unheard. He wondered what stories her silence carried, what pain had forced her onto this road. He walked toward her gently, not wanting to frighten her. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a second, she looked confused, then her eyes widened in recognition. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Keanu knelt down beside her, his eyes soft, filled with care. "It's you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Keanu," she said, almost as if she didn't believe what she was seeing. He nodded, unable to hold back the emotion that rose within him. He reached out his hand, gently taking hers. Her hands were cold, rough from years of hardship, but in that moment, they felt as familiar as they once did when they held each other in the warmth of youth. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The noise of the city faded. It was just the two of them, sitting on the pavement, lost in the memories of what once was and the reality of what now existed. Keanu's heart ached. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions: how she ended up here, what had happened in her life, why she hadn't reached out. But he stayed silent, knowing that questions could wait. Right now, what mattered was the presence, the connection that time could not erase. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were heavy with pain. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said softly. "And I never thought I'd find you here," he replied, his voice trembling with sadness. He looked at her face, and even through the lines of struggle, he could still see the girl he had once loved. Her spirit had not been destroyed, though it was bruised and hidden under layers of suffering. He admired her strength, the quiet dignity she still carried despite her circumstances. Keanu sat with her, not caring who walked by or what they might think. To him, she was not a stranger on the street. She was someone who had once been his whole world. and in that instant, she became that again, a reminder of love, humanity, and the unpredictable journey of life. The air grew colder as night fell, but Keanu didn't move. He wanted to be there, to let her know she wasn't invisible. He listened as she shared fragments of her story, how life had taken unexpected turns, how she had faced loss after loss, and how she had ended up with nowhere else to go. Her voice carried pain, but it also carried courage. Keanu held her hand tightly, his heart breaking with every word. He realized how fragile life could be, how easily dreams could be stolen, and how quickly one's path could change. For him, success had come, but for her, the road had been cruel. And yet, here they were, reunited by chance, sitting side by side as if destiny had decided to write this moment into their lives. As the hours passed, he felt something awaken in him, not just the memory of young love, but a deep sense of responsibility, compassion, and connection. He knew this encounter was not something he could walk away from. It was not just a memory of the past, it was a call to act in the present. Before leaving that night, Keanu promised himself that he would not let her vanish again into the shadows of the city. He couldn't change the past, but perhaps he could help change her present and future. The thought of leaving her there, alone and unseen, was unbearable. As he finally stood up, he looked down at her with gentle eyes. She smiled at him, a smile that carried both gratitude and disbelief. He leaned down, hugged her softly, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." She closed her eyes, holding onto the warmth of his words, and for the first time in many years, she felt seen, remembered, and loved. And as Keanu walked away that night, his mind was filled with memories of the past and the promise of what he could do next. He knew this was not the end of their story, it was the beginning of something unexpected, something that would touch not only their lives but the hearts of many who would one day hear about it. Keanu walked away that night with his heart heavy, but his mind restless. Sleep did not come easily. Even as he lay in his quiet home, surrounded by comfort and security, his thoughts returned again and again to the image of her sitting on that cold pavement, wrapped in a torn blanket. It was hard for him to accept that the girl who once laughed beside him in the warmth of summer evenings was now battling the cold nights on the street. He wondered how life could have created such a sharp contrast between them. He had fame, fortune, and opportunity, while she had nothing but memories and survival. The next day, Keanu found himself retracing his steps, unable to shake the need to see her again. The streets were busy with people rushing to work, cars honking, and the constant hum of the city. Yet amid all this noise, he searched for the familiar face that had once been such a vital part of his life. When he finally found her in almost the same spot as the night before, his chest tightened. She was sitting quietly, her eyes distant, as if lost in thoughts only she understood. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. When she noticed him, surprise flickered across her tired face. "You came back," she whispered, her voice carrying both wonder and disbelief. "Of course," Keanu replied gently. "I couldn't just walk away." He sat down beside her once more, ignoring the curious looks of passers-by. The world around them kept moving, but for him, the only reality was this fragile connection, rekindled after so many years. He wanted to know more about what had happened in her life, though part of him feared the answers. Still, he listened. She hesitated at first, but his kindness gave her the courage to speak. Slowly, she began to share pieces of her story. Life, she explained, had not been easy after they parted ways. She had tried to build a future, but opportunities slipped away one by one. She spoke of jobs that ended, relationships that fell apart, and the gradual unraveling of stability. Each setback pushed her closer to the edge until eventually, there was nothing left to hold onto. Her voice trembled when she spoke of losing family, of friends drifting away, and of the loneliness that followed. She had fought for years, but when the weight became too much, she found herself without a home. Keanu's eyes grew wet as he listened, his heart aching with every word. The pain in her story was real, yet she told it without bitterness. It was as though she had accepted her suffering as part of life, even though it had cost her almost everything. As she spoke, Keanu noticed the way others on the street passed her by. Some didn't look at her at all, while others glanced briefly before turning their eyes away, as if her existence was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. He felt anger rise in his chest. How could society turn its back on someone so full of life, someone who had once dreamed as brightly as anyone else? He wanted to shout at the world, to tell them that she was more than what they saw. Instead, he stayed calm, squeezing her hand gently to let her know he was listening, that she mattered. She smiled faintly at his gesture, though her face carried the weight of exhaustion. "You don't have to sit here with me," she murmured. "I want to," Keanu replied firmly. "You're important to me. You always have been." Those words seemed to soften something in her. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, as though she hadn't felt important to anyone in years. Keanu realized then how deeply homelessness stripped people of dignity. It wasn't just about hunger or cold nights, it was about invisibility, about being forgotten. He couldn't bear the thought of her feeling that way any longer. As the day went on, Keanu offered to bring her food. She resisted at first, pride flickering in her eyes, but eventually she nodded. He returned with warm meals and bottled water, sitting with her as she ate. He didn't treat her like a stranger in need, he treated her like the girl he once loved, with respect and care. Watching her eat, seeing the small relief on her face, made him feel both joy and sadness. Joy that he could help her in this moment, sadness that she had gone hungry for so long. They talked for hours, their conversation moving between memories of the past and the harshness of the present. She reminded him of the first time they had gone to the movies together, of how nervous he had been, and they laughed together despite the pain around them. But then her voice would grow quiet as she spoke of sleeping under bridges, of nights when she was unsure if she would see the morning. Keanu listened closely, never interrupting, never judging, only holding her hand as if to anchor her to the world. The contrast between their lives struck him like a storm. He had walked red carpets, filmed blockbuster movies, and been adored by millions. She had walked cold streets, carrying only memories to comfort her. Yet in that moment, none of the fame or fortune mattered. What mattered was that he had found her again, and that he could do something, however small, to remind her she was not forgotten. As the afternoon light faded, Keanu promised her he would come again. She looked at him, her eyes uncertain, as though she wasn't sure promises meant anything anymore. But he held her gaze firmly. "I'll be back," he said softly. She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt someone meant those words. Someone cared enough to come back, not just out of pity, but out of love, the kind of love that remembered her not as a figure on the street but as a human being with a name, a history, and a heart. That night, Keanu's thoughts were heavier than before. He realized her situation was more complicated than just giving money or offering food. It was about rebuilding dignity, helping her find safety, and showing her that life could still hold hope. He lay awake for hours, thinking about how he could truly help. Fame had given him resources, but he knew it wasn't money alone that she needed. It was compassion, consistency, and someone who truly saw her. The image of her tired eyes stayed with him. Those eyes had once sparkled with dreams when they were young, and now they were clouded by hardship. He vowed to himself that he would do everything he could to bring back that spark. He couldn't change the years she had suffered, but perhaps he could help change the days ahead. When he closed his eyes finally, he whispered her name to the quiet room, as if promising the universe that he would not let her slip away again. And somewhere on the streets, under the indifferent sky, she held onto his promise, her heart carrying a fragile seed of hope she thought she had lost forever. Keanu returned the next day just as he promised. The morning was bright, and the city was alive with movement, but his steps were guided not by duty or curiosity, they were led by something deeper, a pull of the heart. As he approached the familiar corner, his eyes searched anxiously until he spotted her sitting quietly, as if waiting for nothing and no one. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that words could never fully capture. For someone who had long lived in shadows, his presence was like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. "You came back," she whispered again, though this time her voice carried a small hint of joy. "I told you I would," Keanu replied warmly, settling down beside her as if this spot was the most natural place in the world to be. He ignored the curious glances of strangers walking past. To him, nothing else mattered. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the world move around them. Then, slowly, the conversation began to flow. She spoke more than before, perhaps because his return showed her that his care was genuine. She told him about the years that had passed since they had last seen each other, the fleeting jobs, the endless struggles, the loneliness that followed her like a shadow. Her words painted a picture of survival, of nights when the streets were cruel and mornings when she doubted if she could go on. Keanu listened intently, his heart aching with every detail. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to rush her story. Instead, he gave her the one gift so few had offered, his time and his undivided attention. And as she spoke, something remarkable happened. The invisible wall of silence and shame that surrounded her began to crumble. For the first time in many years, she felt like someone truly saw her. Not as a nameless figure on the pavement, not as a burden on society, but as herself, the girl who once laughed, dreamed, and loved. Keanu's eyes reminded her of who she used to be, and slowly, she allowed herself to remember too. When she paused, Keanu gently reminded her of their shared past. He spoke of the little cafe they used to visit, the way she loved strawberry milkshakes, the nights they spent looking up at the stars and talking about a future that seemed endless. As he described these memories, her lips curved into a soft smile. For a brief moment, the weight of her hardships lifted, replaced by the light of what once was. "You still remember all that?" she asked, her voice trembling with both surprise and gratitude. "I never forgot," Keanu replied softly. "You were my first love. How could I forget?" Those words touched her deeply. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of recognition. For so long, she had felt erased by life, invisible to the world. But here he was, reminding her that she had once been cherished, that she still mattered. As the day stretched on, Keanu noticed how people passed them by, some frowning, others whispering, unable to understand why a world-famous actor was sitting on the sidewalk with someone society ignored. But Keanu paid no attention. To him, she was not defined by her circumstances. She was not a headline or a spectacle. She was a human being, a person who had once held his heart, and who still deserved dignity and respect. At one point, he gently asked her, "Can I take you somewhere safe? Even just for a night?" She shook her head quickly, fear flickering in her eyes. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "This is my life now. I've learned to live with it." Keanu looked at her firmly but kindly. "You're not a burden. You're someone I care about. And you deserve more than this." Her eyes welled again, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she let out a shaky laugh. "You haven't changed, Keanu. You always wanted to fix everything." He smiled at her words, but inside, his heart ached. He knew he couldn't undo the past or erase the scars life had left on her. But what he could do was show her that she was not alone anymore. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their youth, laughing softly at old jokes, and sometimes falling into quiet moments where no words were needed. The bond they once shared, buried under years of silence, began to bloom again. It wasn't romantic in the way it had once been, but it was something even more profound, a connection built on compassion, respect, and shared humanity. As the sky darkened, Keanu bought her another warm meal. He noticed how carefully she ate, savoring each bite, as though food was a rare treasure. Watching her broke his heart, but it also strengthened his resolve. He knew he couldn't simply walk away and leave her to face the cold night again. Before leaving, he promised her once more that he would return. "Tomorrow?" she asked, her voice filled with fragile hope. "Tomorrow," he confirmed, smiling gently. That night, Keanu lay awake thinking of her again. He realized how powerful the simple act of listening could be. To her, his presence was not about fame, wealth, or charity. It was about being treated as a person, as someone who deserved to be heard and valued. And he understood something important: sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is not money or material things, but dignity, compassion, and the reminder that someone still cares. In the days that followed, Keanu continued to visit her. Each time, their bond grew stronger. She shared more of her struggles, and he shared more of his memories. Slowly, he began to see glimpses of the girl he had loved so long ago, hidden beneath the layers of hardship. Her laughter returned in small moments, and her eyes, though tired, began to shine with the faint spark of hope. He didn't see her as a symbol of tragedy. He saw her as someone worth fighting for, someone whose life still carried meaning. And she, in turn, began to believe that maybe the world had not completely forgotten her. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a place for her in it. Their connection, once lost, had been rekindled not by chance alone, but by the power of kindness and the courage to care. And as the days went on, Keanu knew that this encounter was not just a fleeting moment in his life. It was a turning point for both of them. Keanu could not stop thinking about her. Every night after visiting her, he would sit in his quiet home, surrounded by all the comforts that success had brought him, yet feeling an emptiness that no luxury could fill. He had lived through losses in his own life, but seeing her in such pain touched him differently. It wasn't just sympathy, it was a deep ache in his soul. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone who had once been a part of his heart. The next morning, he returned with a plan. He brought food and warm clothes, carrying them in simple bags so he wouldn't draw attention. When he found her again, she was sitting where she usually did, her eyes fixed on the ground as if the world no longer had anything to offer her. But when she looked up and saw him, her face softened with relief. "You're here again," she said, almost like a child surprised by kindness. "I told you I would be," Keanu replied warmly. He handed her the food, and she hesitated before taking it. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the pride that still lived inside her even after everything. But when she finally accepted, she whispered, "Thank you," with a sincerity that pierced his heart. They ate together on the sidewalk, sharing small smiles and short stories. He talked about the city, about how sometimes fame felt like a mask that hid his true self. She listened, her eyes full of quiet understanding. Then she told him about the challenges of living without a home, the cold nights, the fear of losing what little she had, and the loneliness that weighed heavier than hunger. Keanu listened to every word, his heart breaking and yet determined. When the meal was finished, Keanu looked at her seriously. "I don't want to see you suffer like this. Please, let me help you find somewhere safe." She shook her head quickly, almost afraid. "No, Keanu. People don't understand. Once you lose everything, it's not so simple to start again. I've been forgotten. I don't belong anywhere now." Her words stung, but he didn't give up. He leaned closer and said softly, "You belong, and you matter. I can't change the past, but I can stand with you now. Let me try." She turned her face away, tears sliding down her cheeks. For years, people had passed her without even a glance, and now here was Keanu, speaking to her as if she were the most important person in the world. Part of her longed to trust him, but another part feared disappointment. She had been hurt too many times, and hope was dangerous for someone who had lived in the dark for so long. Keanu respected her silence. He didn't push, but he refused to leave her feeling alone. Instead, he stayed by her side, making her laugh with old memories and reminding her of the girl she once was. As hours passed, she began to relax, her eyes softening whenever he spoke. The following days, Keanu made sure she had food and water, sometimes bringing her fresh clothes or small things she needed. He didn't parade his actions, didn't allow anyone to take photos or turn it into a story for the media. To him, this wasn't about charity or reputation. It was about her dignity, about reminding her she was more than her circumstances. One afternoon, when the air was especially cold, Keanu placed a warm jacket around her shoulders. She looked at him with eyes wide, almost ready to protest, but he smiled gently and said, "No arguments. You deserve warmth." She pulled the jacket tight, her lips trembling as she whispered, "No one has cared for me like this in so many years." Her words made him pause. How could someone so full of life once be reduced to believing she wasn't worthy of care? He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "You are cared for," he told her. "You always were, and you always will be." It was in moments like this that something began to change. She started to sit straighter, to look around instead of only at the ground. The way she spoke became lighter, as though a small seed of hope had been planted within her. Keanu noticed it, and though he didn't speak of it, he felt it deeply. One evening, when the street was quiet and the stars appeared faintly in the sky, she asked him, "Why are you doing all this for me? You're famous, successful, you don't need to be here with me." Keanu looked at her with calm eyes. "Because you're not just someone from my past. You're someone who taught me what love meant when I was young. And because no one deserves to be forgotten. Not you, not anyone." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not only of sadness. There was gratitude in them, a spark that had not been there before. She didn't respond with words, but she squeezed his hand tightly, as if holding on to the truth he had given her. The more time they spent together, the more Keanu realized this was more than a chance encounter. It was destiny giving him an opportunity to show that love and compassion still mattered in a world that often forgot both. He knew he couldn't erase her pain, but he could give her something just as powerful: dignity, care, and the chance to feel human again. On another day, Keanu quietly arranged for her to see a doctor. She resisted at first, worried about the cost, worried about being treated differently. But Keanu reassured her, saying, "It's not charity. It's friendship. Let me be here for you." She finally agreed, and as she sat in the waiting room, Keanu sat beside her the whole time, holding her hand. He didn't care if people stared or whispered. To him, she was worth every moment. The small steps he took weren't about giving her money or showing grand gestures. They were about restoring her trust in humanity. Each time he came back, each time he listened, each time he reminded her she was valuable, the pieces of her broken spirit slowly began to heal. She still hesitated to leave the street, still unsure if she could face the world again. But Keanu didn't rush her. He knew healing wasn't instant. What mattered was that she was no longer alone. As days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. It wasn't the romantic love of their youth, but it was something even more profound. It was the love of compassion, the bond of souls who had once shared dreams and now shared survival. And in this bond, she began to rediscover herself. For her, his kindness was not just help, it was proof that she still had value. For him, her presence was a reminder that fame meant nothing without humanity. Together, they created moments that silenced the noise of the world and replaced it with something rare, genuine connection. And slowly, as he continued to stand by her, the hopeless woman on the street began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: the courage to believe in tomorrow. Weeks turned into months, and Keanu continued to be there for her. He never allowed his busy life to become an excuse. Even when his work called him away, he always found time to return, to sit with her, to remind her she was not forgotten. Slowly, her life began to change, not because of grand gestures, but because of the steady presence of someone who truly cared. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky with soft colors, she looked at him with eyes that seemed brighter than before. "You've changed my life," she whispered. "Not with money, not with promises, but with kindness. I thought the world had forgotten me. But you proved I was wrong." Keanu smiled gently. "The world may forget, but love doesn't. You deserve more than the shadows. You deserve to stand again, to live, to be free of this pain." It wasn't easy for her to believe. Years of hardship had carved doubt deep into her heart. But Keanu's persistence gave her courage. He arranged a small, safe place for her to stay, and though she hesitated, afraid of stepping into a world that had once broken her, she agreed because she trusted him. The first night she slept in a warm bed again, she cried quietly, not out of sadness, but because she never thought she would feel such comfort again. Keanu didn't stop there. He helped her reconnect with medical care, ensuring her health was looked after. He guided her gently, never forcing, never making her feel like she was a burden. Every step was a choice she made, and every step she took was supported by his steady hand. What mattered most was not the shelter, not the food, not even the clothes, it was the dignity he restored. He spoke to her as an equal, laughed with her as a friend, and looked at her as someone who had value. Slowly, she began to look at herself the same way. She started smiling more often, remembering her old passions, even talking about small dreams for the future. One day, while they sat together, she turned to him and said, "Do you know what the greatest gift you gave me is?" He tilted his head and asked softly, "What?" "You gave me back myself. For years I thought I was invisible, that I didn't matter. But you reminded me that I'm still here, that I still have a story worth living." Her words touched him deeply. He realized then that the true power of kindness wasn't in fixing everything, but in reminding people of their worth. Keanu never shared their story with the media, never sought praise. To him, this was not about the world knowing how kind he was. It was about her, about a bond that had survived time and pain, and about being human enough to care when it mattered most. His quiet humility made the moment even more powerful, because it was real. As she regained strength, she began to help others around her. The same woman who once felt forgotten now encouraged those still on the streets, sharing her food, offering words of comfort, and telling them not to give up hope. Her change was not only for herself, it became a light for others too. Keanu watched her with admiration. She had been broken, but not destroyed. Her spirit, though hidden for years, now shined brighter because of the darkness she had survived. He realized that her journey was an example of courage, and that his role had simply been to remind her of the strength she always carried within. One evening, as they walked together, she stopped and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Out of all the people you could have helped, why me?" Keanu's voice was steady but full of emotion. "Because when I saw you, I didn't just see a person on the street. I saw the girl who once gave me love when I had nothing, the one who believed in me before the world did. This was never about saving someone. It was about giving back the kindness you gave me long ago." Her tears fell freely, but this time they were tears of peace. She leaned against him, and he held her gently, both of them knowing that love was not bound by time, success, or circumstance. It was something far deeper, something eternal. Their story spread quietly, whispered by those who had witnessed it. Not through headlines or cameras, but through the hearts of people who were touched by the rare sight of a man who used his success not to elevate himself, but to lift someone else. In the end, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It wasn't about who Keanu was to the world. It was about who he chose to be in a moment when kindness mattered. And for her, it wasn't about being rescued. It was about being seen, valued, and remembered. Together, they became a living reminder that compassion can change lives, that love never truly fades, and that even in the darkest places, light can be found if someone chooses to carry it. Years later, when she spoke of that time, she didn't describe it as the story of a celebrity helping her. She described it as the story of a friend who kept a promise, who showed up when no one else did, and who reminded her of the power of humanity. For Keanu, the experience stayed in his heart as one of the most meaningful moments of his life. He had lived through fame, through applause, through the noise of success, but nothing compared to the quiet truth of sitting on the sidewalk with his first love, holding her hand, and choosing kindness. And so, the world moved on, as it always does, but their bond remained. Not as a story of pity, but as a story of love, dignity, and compassion that would live in the hearts of anyone who heard it. Because sometimes, the greatest legacy a person can leave is not the roles they played or the wealth they earned, but the way they touched another soul with kindness. And Keanu's choice that day, to sit beside her and to never let her go unseen again, became a story that would inspire others for years to come.